The words hung in the air of our living room, cold and sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll get nothing, Sarah." It wasn't my husband Mark who said it. He just sat there, a silent monument to our shared history, his expression carefully neutral. The words came from his lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, whose smile was as thin and brittle as a dead leaf. We weren't in a sterile conference room yet. This was the opening act, the preemptive strike, staged in the home I had poured my soul into for 7 years. The house smelled of lemon polish and the faint, sweet scent of the jasmine blooming by the window, smells I associated with peace. Now they felt like a mockery. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation," Mr. Davies continued, his voice smooth and condescending. He gestured around the room, at the custom-built bookshelves I had designed, the antique rug we'd found together on a trip to Maine, the framed architectural sketches Mark had drawn, which I had insisted we display. "Mark built this business, this life, from the ground up. You were a supportive partner. The law recognizes that, of course, but it doesn't entitle you to half of his vision." I stared at Mark, waiting for him to intervene, to soften the blow, to show even a flicker of the man I had married. He didn't. He just adjusted the cuff of his expensive shirt, a shirt I had picked out for him, and looked at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. His silence was the real weapon. Mr. Davies was just the messenger. "The company, Innovate Design, is facing significant debt," Mark finally said, his voice flat, rehearsed. "We're on the verge of bankruptcy. There's nothing left to divide, Sarah. This divorce, it's a formality, a way for us to both start fresh, without being tied to a sinking ship." A sinking ship. He said it with such casual finality, as if he were discussing a failed project, and not the life we had sworn to build together. Bankruptcy. The word felt alien. I was the one who managed the books, paid the invoices, balanced the accounts. I knew our cash flow was tight, but we weren't drowning. Or so I thought. I felt my hands tremble, and I clasped them in my lap to keep them still. "Bankruptcy?" I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "Mark, we had that new contract with the city. The projections were strong." Mr. Davies let out a small, pitying sigh. "Projections are not profits, my dear. The reality is, the business is insolvent. Mark is being generous by not holding you liable for half the debt. His offer is to let you walk away clean. No assets, but no liabilities either. It's the kindest thing to do." Kind. The word echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the room. He was framing my erasure as an act of mercy. He was going to leave me with nothing. No home, no savings, no share in the company I had worked in day and night, and he wanted me to thank him for it. I looked from the lawyer's smug face to my husband's empty eyes, and I felt something shift inside me. The shock, the hurt, it was all still there. But beneath it, a slow, cold anger began to uncoil. They thought I was weak. They thought I would crumble. They had no idea I was the only one who knew how to read a balance sheet. And they had no idea what I had found in a locked folder on his laptop just 2 nights before. They thought this was the end of the conversation. For me, it was just the beginning. It hadn't always been like this. 7 years ago, Innovate Design wasn't a company. It was just a dream sketched on a napkin in a 24-hour diner. Mark was the visionary, the artist. His head was full of sweeping architectural concepts, sleek lines, and sustainable materials. He could talk a client into believing in a building that didn't exist yet. He was brilliant, charming, and utterly disorganized. I was the opposite. I was the quiet, steady hand. With a degree in business management and a mind for logistics, I saw the beauty not just in his designs, but in the spreadsheets, the project timelines, the client contracts. But I was the one who turned his art into a business. We started in our garage, with a second-hand drafting table and a laptop I'd had since college. I worked a full-time job for the first 2 years, pouring every spare dollar and every waking hour into our fledgling company. I built the website, managed the payroll, negotiated with suppliers, and learned the city's labyrinthine permit laws. Mark designed. He was the face of the company, the one who went to networking events and accepted the local design awards. I was the engine, hidden away, making sure everything ran. "We're a team," he used to say, kissing my forehead as I hunched over a stack of invoices late at night. "You're the brains, I'm just the pretty face." For years it worked. We grew, moved into a small office downtown, and hired our first employees. We bought our house, a fixer-upper that we slowly transformed. Every wall we painted, every floorboard we replaced, felt like a testament to our partnership. But over the last year, something had changed. Mark became more distant, more secretive. The late-night investor meetings became more frequent. He started taking calls in the other room, his voice dropping to a murmur whenever I walked in. When I asked about the company's finances, which had always been my domain, he became defensive. "Don't worry about it, Sarah," he'd say, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm handling a new strategic direction. It's complex." He started talking about a new hire, a young, ambitious designer named Jessica. She was a protégé, he said, someone who finally understood his grand vision. He'd come home buzzing with ideas she had supposedly inspired. Ideas that often involved expensive new software or consulting fees I couldn't account for. The business started to feel like a place I no longer belonged. Memos were sent without me on the CC line. Decisions were made in meetings I wasn't invited to. When I tried to raise concerns about our spending, Mark would look at me with a tired expression. "You're too cautious, Sarah. You have to spend money to make money. Jessica gets that." I told myself it was stress. I told myself he was under pressure. I loved him, and I had built my entire life around the belief that he loved me. But the man who once called me his partner was now treating me like an obstacle. The final chilling sign came a week before the divorce announcement. I came home early and heard him in his study on the phone. His voice was animated, excited. "It's all set," he was saying. "The Phoenix project is ready to launch as soon as the old company is dissolved. She won't see it coming. She'll be so grateful to walk away without debt. She won't even ask questions." My blood ran cold. Phoenix project. I had never heard of it. It wasn't on our books, not in our project files. It was a secret, his secret. I backed away from the door before he could see me, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He wasn't just leaving me. He was executing a plan, and I was the only liability he had left to neutralize. The night he told me he wanted a divorce, I didn't sleep. I lay beside him in our bed, feigning sleep, listening to the steady, untroubled rhythm of his breathing. The man I had loved for a decade was a stranger, and he was sleeping peacefully while orchestrating my ruin. The anger that had been a slow, cold coil in my gut was now a furnace. He thought I was a fool. He thought I was a timid, supportive partner who would just sign the papers and disappear. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten that I was the one who set up the entire company server. At 3 a.m., I slipped out of bed. The house was dark and silent, every shadow a potential hiding place for another lie. I went to the office, the small room at the back of the house where we had first launched our dream. His laptop was on the desk, closed but not shut down. My heart hammered against my ribs as I lifted the screen. It was password protected, of course, but he was a man of habit. He used the same password for everything. The name of the first street we lived on, followed by the year we met. Maplewood, 2015. My fingers trembled as I typed it in. The screen flickered to life, granting me access to the digital graveyard of our marriage. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. I scanned his emails, his documents, his recent files. First, it was all there, hidden in plain sight. Invoices to shell corporations I'd never heard of. Payments for consulting services from companies that didn't seem to exist. He was bleeding Innovate Design dry, one falsified expense at a time. He was creating the very bankruptcy he was using as an excuse to leave me with nothing. Then I found it. A folder hidden deep within a subdirectory named simply PP, the Phoenix Project. I clicked it open and my breath caught in my throat. It was a complete business plan, meticulously detailed. A new company, Phoenix Architecture, was already registered. The sole owner, Mark, and the lead designer listed on the masthead? Jessica. The plan was sickeningly brilliant. He was systematically transferring Innovate Design's most valuable assets, client lists, proprietary design templates, ongoing project bids, to the new company. He was using our shared funds to pay for Phoenix's startup costs, logging them as Innovate's expenses. Once Innovate Design was officially declared bankrupt and its debts cleared, Phoenix Architecture would rise from the ashes, debt-free, with a full slate of clients and projects, and I would be left with the ashes of our old life, legally barred from claiming any part of his new one. I scrolled through the documents, my vision blurring with tears of rage. There were emails between him and Jessica, full of shared excitement and cruel inside jokes about my lack of vision. There was a budget for their new office, a lease agreement for a sleek downtown loft, even a photo of them toasting with champagne. The file dated just last week. He hadn't just built a new company. He had built a new life, on the foundations of my work, my trust, and my love. I started taking pictures with my phone, screenshots of every incriminating document, every email, every financial transfer. The click of the phone's camera was the only sound in the room, each one a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. He had underestimated me. He had assumed I would believe his lies. He had no idea I had just found the truth. The next morning, I felt like a spy in my own home. I made coffee, smiled politely when Mark came into the kitchen, and acted like the broken, confused woman he expected me to be. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told him, my voice intentionally fragile. "Maybe you're right. Maybe a clean break is for the best." I saw the relief wash over his face, a subtle relaxation of his shoulders. He thought he had won. The condescending pity in his eyes was almost unbearable, but I held his gaze and played my part. As soon as he left for a meeting, I called Chloe. Chloe had been our bookkeeper at Innovate Design for the past 5 years. She was quiet, meticulous, and fiercely loyal. She was also one of the few people at the company who saw what I did, not just what Mark projected. We met at a small, out-of-the-way cafe on the other side of town. I slid into the booth opposite her, my hands shaking as I placed my phone on the table. "I need to show you something," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And I need you to promise me you'll just listen first." She nodded, her expression serious. I showed her the photos, the business plan for Phoenix Architecture, the falsified invoices, the emails between Mark and Jessica. As she scrolled through them, the color drained from her face. Her usual professional composure cracked, replaced by a look of slowly dawning horror. "I knew it," she finally breathed, looking up at me, her eyes wide. I knew something was wrong. He kept asking me to categorize things in ways that made no sense. He'd have me log huge payments for software licenses to vendors I couldn't find any information on. When I questioned him, he told me it was part of a confidential expansion project and that you had approved it. My stomach twisted. He had used my name, my reputation for fiscal responsibility, to legitimize his fraud. "He told me not to bother you with the details," Chloe continued, her voice trembling with anger now. "He said you were focused on the creative side and that he was handling the new financial strategy. I thought it was strange, but he's Mark. He can be so convincing." "He's a liar," I said, the words tasting like acid. "He's bankrupting our company on purpose so he can start a new one with her, and he's planning to leave me with the debt." Chloe's hand covered her mouth. "Oh, Sarah, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to fight him," I said, a new wave of resolve washing over me. "But I need more than just screenshots. I need something undeniable, something in his own voice." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "There's more," she said quietly. "A few weeks ago, he asked me to pull all the records for a shell corporation called Viridian Holdings. He said it was for a potential acquisition. The transfers were massive, all outgoing. He made me sign a non-disclosure agreement. But seeing this, that has to be where the money is going." She scribbled the name on a napkin and pushed it across the table. It was the missing piece, the name of the account where he was hiding our money. I looked at Chloe, my oldest and most trusted employee, and saw not just an ally, but a friend. "He thinks I'm going to walk away with nothing," I said. "He's in for a surprise." The plan was terrifyingly simple, and it hinged on one thing: Mark's monumental ego. He believed he was smarter than everyone, especially me. He had painted me as the cautious, unimaginative partner, the ball and chain, holding back his genius. Now I would use that caricature to my advantage. I needed him to confess, to brag, to lay out his entire scheme with the same pride he used to describe his architectural designs. I needed his own words to be the weapon that dismantled his lies. I spent the day preparing, not just mentally, but physically. I chose an outfit that made me look tired and defeated. A simple gray sweater, no makeup, my hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun. I practiced my expression in the mirror until the feigned fragility looked authentic. Every part of me had to scream, surrender. That evening, I waited for him to come home. The house was quiet, the air thick with unspoken things. I had placed my phone on the bookshelf in the living room, nestled between a stack of art books. It was set to record audio. The tiny microphone pointed directly at the armchair where he always sat. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What if he saw it? What if my voice shook? What if he didn't fall for it? When he walked in, I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the cold fireplace. He paused in the doorway, assessing the scene. "Hey," he said, his tone soft, cautious. I looked up, letting my eyes appear red-rimmed and swollen. "Hi," I whispered. He came over and sat in the armchair, exactly where I knew he would. He leaned forward, adopting the role of the compassionate executioner. "Have you been thinking about our conversation?" I nodded slowly. I don't understand, Mark. How did it all go so wrong? The business? We were a team. I thought we were building something that would last." I let a single tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't entirely an act. The grief was real, just not for the reasons he thought. He fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. The pity in his eyes was quickly replaced by a familiar spark of arrogance. He saw an opening not to console me, but to justify himself, to finally explain his brilliance to someone he thought was too simple to have figured it out. "Sarah, you have to understand," he began, leaning back in his chair, a lecturer preparing to enlighten a struggling student. Innovate design was a good start, but it was limited. It was limited by your caution, your fear of taking risks. You couldn't see the bigger picture. I stayed silent, letting him fill the space. This was it. I just had to let him talk. "I had to evolve," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "I had to create something new, something that wasn't held back by outdated thinking. The Phoenix Project, it's not just a new company, it's a revolution in design. And Jessica, she understands that. She's not afraid to push boundaries." "So you're leaving me for her," I whispered, making my voice crack. "It's not that simple," he scoffed, though it was clear he was flattered. "It's about vision. I had to protect that vision. I had to find a way to move the assets, the real value of the company, to a place where they could flourish. It was a strategic dissolution, Sarah. A controlled demolition. I knew you wouldn't understand the necessity of it, so I had to handle it myself. It was the only way to save the core of what we built from the debt you were so afraid of." He was spinning it, framing his theft as a heroic act of preservation. The recording was capturing every self-serving, damning word. My hands were clenched into fists under the blanket on my lap, but my face remained a mask of heartbroken confusion. He was on a roll now, fueled by my silence and his own self-importance. The living room had become his stage, and he was delivering the performance of a lifetime. He believed he was talking to a defeated woman, someone who was finally seeing the truth of her own inadequacy. He had no idea he was delivering his own confession to a jury of one. "It was a masterstroke, really," he said, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. He leaned forward, as if sharing a profound secret. "I created Viridian Holdings as a temporary vessel. We paid them for consulting and licensing fees, all legitimate on paper. But Viridian is just me. The money flows in, gets cleaned, and then it's used to fund Phoenix. By the time the auditors look at Innovate's books, all they'll see is a company that overspent and went under. It's perfectly legal, perfectly clean. They'll never be able to trace it back." I just stared at him, my expression a carefully constructed blend of awe and devastation. So, the bankruptcy, it's not real? I asked, my voice a broken whisper. He laughed, a real, genuine laugh, full of smug satisfaction. Of course it's real for Innovate Design. The company is a shell now. It's worthless. That's the beauty of it. The debts will be written off, and we, will be free to start over. Jessica and I have already secured the Old City contract under the Phoenix name. We're launching next month. He stood up and began to pace, energized by his own narrative. He was no longer just talking to me. He was reliving his triumph. You see, you were always holding us back, Sarah. Your constant need for safety nets, for balanced books, for predictable growth. That's not how you build an empire. You have to be willing to burn the old world down to create a new one. He finally stopped in front of me, looking down with an expression of profound, almost godlike pity. I'm sorry it had to be this way, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. I'm sorry for the hurt, but I couldn't let your fear drag my dream into the ground. When you sign those papers, you'll be free too. You can go get a simple job, something you're comfortable with. No more stress, no more risk. He was offering me a life of mediocrity as a parting gift, paid for with the smoldering ruins of my own. He actually believed he was doing me a favor. And the house? I asked, my voice barely audible. It's tied to the business loans. It will have to be sold to cover the debts, he said with a practiced sigh. There's no way around it. But like I said, I'll make sure you get a little something to get you started again. He thought he had covered every angle, sealed every exit. He had laid out his crime, his motive, and his getaway plan, all while trying to convince me it was for my own good. The audio file on my phone was now a nuclear bomb, and he had just handed me the launch codes. I slowly stood up, wrapping my arms around myself as if I were cold. I need some time to think, I said, turning away so he couldn't see the glint of steel that I was sure was now in my eyes. Of course, he said, his voice magnanimous. Take all the time you need. I walked out of the room without looking back. He had no idea that the time I needed was already up. His confession was saved, secure, and ready. The demolition he had planned was coming, but it wasn't Innovate Design that was about to be leveled. It was him. The conference room at Mr. Davies' law firm was designed to intimidate. The table was a vast, polished expanse of dark mahogany that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. The chairs were black leather, high-backed and imposing. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a reminder of the power and money that existed in a world they were trying to lock me out of. Mark and Mr. Davies sat on one side, exuding an air of bored confidence. Mark was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful architect about to shed his past. Mr. Davies had a stack of documents in front of him, his thin lips curved into a perpetual sneer. I sat on the other side, alone. I had declined to bring my own lawyer for this initial meeting. It was part of the strategy. I had to maintain the illusion of the helpless, overwhelmed wife who was about to be steamrolled. So, Sarah, Mr. Davies began, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. As we discussed, this is a very straightforward dissolution. Innovate Design is bankrupt. Its assets are frozen, its debts substantial. Mark has graciously agreed not to pursue you for your half of the liability. In return, you will sign this document, relinquishing any and all claims to the business, the house, and any other shared assets. He is also offering you a one-time payment of $10,000 as a gesture of goodwill. $10,000. For 7 years of my life, for my designs, for my financial security, for my heart. It was so insulting it was almost comical. I looked at the paper without touching it. I don't think that's fair, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Mr. Davies chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Fair? My dear, this is more than fair. This is a gift. Given your lack of contribution to the company's intellectual property and the current state of its finances, you're legally entitled to nothing. You should be grateful Mark is so generous. Mark shifted in his chair, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. Sarah, don't make this difficult. We talked about this. It's the best way for everyone. You'll get nothing in this divorce. Mr. Davies' voice sharpened, his manufactured pleasantness evaporating. Sign the paper, take the money, and start over. If you fight this, we will countersue you for your share of the company's debt. You will walk away with less than nothing. You'll be buried in legal fees and debt for years. Is that what you want? The threat hung in the silent room. This was the moment. The checkmate they had planned from the start. I took a slow breath, then reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I placed it gently on the polished surface of the table, right in the center. Mark frowned, confused. Mr. Davies rolled his eyes, assuming it was some desperate, emotional gesture. You're right, Mark, I said, looking directly at my husband. You did build something. You built a very elaborate story. Then I pressed play. His own voice filled the silent, expensive room. Confident, arrogant, and utterly damning. It was a masterstroke, really. I created Viridian Holdings. The money flows in, gets cleaned, and then it's used to fund Phoenix. It's perfectly legal, perfectly clean. They'll never be able to trace it back. The color drained from Mark's face. He looked as if he'd been physically struck, his mouth opening slightly in stunned disbelief. Mr. Davies's sneer froze, then melted into a slack-jawed expression of pure panic. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. My recording continued. The company is a shell now. It's worthless. That's the beauty of it. The room went utterly silent. The only sound, the crystal-clear recording of my husband detailing his fraud, his affair, his meticulous plan to destroy me. I let it play for another 30 seconds, then pressed pause. I leaned forward, my voice no longer quiet, but clear and cold as ice. Now, I said, looking from my husband's ashen face to his lawyer's. Now, let's talk about what's fair. The aftermath was not a fiery explosion, but a quiet, swift collapse. The power in the room had shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that there was no room left for bluffs or threats. Mr. Davies, for the first time, was silent. His face was a pale, sweaty mask of professional terror. He wasn't just looking at a messy divorce anymore. He was looking at wire fraud, embezzlement, and a client who had just confessed to it all on tape. Mark didn't speak. He just stared at the phone, then at me, his eyes holding a new kind of emotion I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not of losing money, but of being seen. Truly seen for the thief and the liar he was. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid out my terms, which I had prepared with my own lawyer the day before. I wasn't interested in destroying him completely. I wasn't interested in a long public court battle that would drag us both through the mud. I was interested in justice. I want a 50% share of all assets funneled into Viridian Holdings and the Phoenix Project, I stated calmly. I have the transaction records. I also want full, unencumbered ownership of the house, and you will personally assume all debts associated with the dissolution of Innovate Design. Mr. Davies started to speak, a weak protest forming on his lips, but I cut him off. My other option, I continued, my gaze fixed on Mark, is to hand this recording and all of my documentation over to the district attorney and the IRS. Your Phoenix project will be grounded before it ever takes flight, and you, Mark, will be facing federal charges. The choice is yours. There was no choice, and we all knew it. The settlement was drafted and signed within a week. Mark moved out of the house the next day, his belongings packed into boxes, with the same quiet efficiency with which he had tried to erase me. I never saw Jessica. I heard through the grapevine that the Phoenix project imploded before it even launched, once the investors, friends he had lied to, pulled out. The first few months were strange. The house was too quiet. I'd walk into a room and almost expect to see him, to feel that familiar tension in the air. But slowly, the silence began to change. It stopped being an absence and started being a presence. Peace. I sold the big mahogany table from the conference room of my memory and replaced it with a simple wooden one where I could spread out my own blueprints. I didn't reopen Innovate Design. I let its name die with the life it belonged to. Instead, I started my own firm, small and focused. from the very same office in the back of the house. I called it Clarity Designs. I hired Chloe as my business manager, and we built it from the ground up, honestly and carefully. We took on smaller projects at first, ones with clients who valued integrity as much as aesthetics. I don't hate Mark. Hate is a heavy thing to carry, and my hands are busy building my own future. Sometimes I feel a pang of sadness for the man he used to be, or the man I thought he was. But then I remember the coldness in his eyes, the casual cruelty in his voice on that recording, and I know I didn't lose a husband. I escaped a con man. He underestimated me. That was his fatal flaw. He saw a quiet partner, not a silent architect. He saw a wife, not a witness. He thought he was burning down my world, but he only cleared the land for me to build something new, something better, something that was entirely mine. And every morning, when I walk into my office and the sun streams through the window, I feel not the absence of what was lost, but the solid, grounding presence of everything I have built.